in our brown bag series this year. We're going to have another one in the next 2 weeks from Dr. Eric Thomas. But today we are very pleased to have Dr. Kelly Knight coming to us from Virginia Tech, and I'm going to allow Walt to do the honors of introducing her.
Okay. I'm going to stand up because I'm a fucking So actually, I met Kelly Wright about 7 or 8 years ago when she called me from Kentucky, where she was a graduate student at the time, and we arranged a Zoom meeting, right, with the linguistics program. And then, so we've sort of kept in contact since that time. She received, actually, it's interesting because she did her undergraduate work at Maryville College. Okay, here's a trivial question for Eric. What other famous linguists went to that college? Yeah. Who else?
He said other.
What's third?
Other, okay. Paul Reed, Michael Montgomery, and Claire Dannenberg. They don't have a linguistics program, do they?
Nope.
They don't have anything. No, I didn't mean.
Yeah,
There.
like a Wild West.
But I think that's sort of a curiosity that 4 people who we know and know were significant figures in the field actually went to that college. Because the linguistics department, but it may be location something in Appalachia that sort of spurred it. I don't know. But anyhow, so then she went to Kentucky, and then she went to the University of Michigan, where she got her PhD in 2022. Yeah, so she's the newbie in terms of her PhD, and she's now on a postdoctorate fellowship at Virginia Tech for a couple of years, where of course Claire Dannenberg taught, and sort of a connection there. Actually, my applied class, I don't believe in the term applied, but that's what the course is called. But that course, we've read a couple of articles of Kelly, and one of the reasons that Kelly is unique is she does what I would refer to as engaged research. That is, we had a big study of this and its merits compared to non-engaged research and so forth. But you know, which is again a sort of, in my opinion, a fallacious sort of dichotomy. But anyhow, that's one of the reasons that we had her, because she's done actual research on linguistic profiling as opposed to sort of experience based sort of commentary, and is also interested in other dimensions of social justice related to language. So we're welcome to we're happy to I was going to do that. That's okay.
Definitely, you're there, 100%.
That's your party one. You just want to make her feel.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. So we're happy to have her here. After the event, we will have lunch. Where will the lunch be, Brody?
Wherever we can find warmth, so maybe not Players of Street. I love Players of Street, but it's kind of cold.
Well, we're not going to eat outside.
I don't know, we can decide.
Oh, well, we probably should decide now.
Yeah, it's I feel like we'll figure that, yeah. We're going to marinate. and
Yeah,
then-
yeah. Let it.
As
So
you
you're not going to concentrate on the talk, you're going to think about.
Think about lunch.
Okay, okay. After the talk, where Brody will give us, Brody will give due diligence to thinking about lunch. We will also naturally go for lunch, but with that sort of crazy ass introduction, Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you.
And now I'm gonna one minute.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm super happy to be here. I thank you for the introduction. I always give a positionality statement when I take up a place of power, like at the podium. So I will share with you that I am a Black biracial cisgender woman from Appalachia. I'm currently a postdoctoral research fellow at Virginia Tech. I'm working class, chaotic neutral. And while I'm not first gen in the way most use the term, I am one generation removed from educational segregation in this country. Okay, so before I begin, let me share that this bit.ly link here will take you to your very own copy of these slides, which include many embedded links to connect with future resources and a fully prepared transcript that I'll be reading along with today in lieu of signed interpretation for this event. And you can use that transcript if you just prefer to follow along as well. There's a little underscore in there, so just yeah, okay. I'll be speaking for about 45 minutes today, and I'll begin with a review of some foundational linguistic texts concerning reciprocity and the ways in which it's incorporated into various approaches. Then I'll share one good faith attempt that I've made at reinvigorating reciprocity models with metalinguistic inquiry, and we'll finish by considering together, I hope, the ways that you may be applying them to your own work. Okay. So reciprocity is a concept that graces most formalized sciences as it manifests in natural systems of exchange, particularly those involving person-to-person or non-market exchanges of goods and labor. Thus, reciprocity has been defined in various ways related to the context such exchanges occur in. First, it's known as the practice of exchanging things for mutual benefit, coming from the Latin reciprocus and meaning moving backwards and forwards. This meaning is carried into engineering and describing the ways in which individual parts operate or transfer energy through a system. Reciprocity also describes behavior in general in this way, referring to gestures or actions one makes in response to a corresponding one, like a wave. Reciprocity can also describe a mutual exchange of privileges between two individuals or groups. Typically, this usage refers to the recognition of one institution of the validity of privileges granted by another. This is a crucial facet of these definitions for us to consider because we, as expert linguists, represent institutions, our universities, and other organizations, the formalized discipline of linguistics, higher education, and at times even the global north when we enter communities seeking to collect language data. In international law, reciprocity means the right to equality and mutual respect between states. And our early literatures confront and seek to instill this assumption of mutual equity into the developing methods of organized language study in the field. So let me briefly then give you a landscape of our literature informing this conversation. Before we even begin to consider what types of data we're gathering or the research questions we have, we can start with Saussure in 1916 asking us, of what use is linguistics? When considering the field's dedication to gathering and analyzing linguistic forms in an effort to describe language structure and function, Saussure states that language, with a capital L, is a factor of greater importance than any other. And because of this, linguistic work should not solely be the business of a handful of specialists. Ideally, all people would be involved in the study of language because language structure and function is relevant to all people. The knowledge we are building should belong to everyone. As Cameron et al., in their discussion of the ways in which the co-naturalization of language and power shape our research, similarly reflects, if knowledge is worth having, it's worth sharing. Rickford 99 also considers the involvement of the expert linguist in the activation of our theoretical findings, casting merely the description of linguistic features as application, advocacy, and empowerment, even if we aren't dealing directly with native speakers or communities. In and out of the field, as we work to document and describe language usage, McKnight tells us that our practice of our skills involves tangible connections with the community and that documentarians and the documented are in this experience together and that it is a link unbroken once formed. The world's languages are often found to express semantic reciprocity, which is observed when at least two individuals enter into a reciprocal relationship that expresses referential symmetry. When analyzing the example sentence, John and Marsha criticized each other, we assign the agent and patient roles to both individuals because we know that John is criticizing Marsha, but Marsha is also criticizing John. Here we can observe that back and forth aspect of reciprocal movement that the Latin reciprocus brought with it into the language, with the agent role sliding frictionlessly between Marsha and John. Koenig notes that such semantically reciprocal constructions are the most complex event type expressed by regular grammatical means across the world's languages, and holds that this phenomenon, frequently discussed with the terms altruism or exchange, lies at the root of the social organization and ethics. So even though semantic reciprocity doesn't appear to be tied to concerns of equity at first blush, such grammatical constructions encode mutual exchange, and the business of describing semantic reciprocity requires a recognition of the inherent equity of all actors, as symmetry is at the heart of these operations. So how is this type of symmetrical equity relevant to our theoretical development? Well, Lebov's principles of error correction and debt incurred focus on the obligation of linguists to expose asymmetries, to explicate misunderstandings and misinterpretations about language for the widest possible audience. And Wolfram 93's principle of linguistic gratuity additionally encourages linguists to pursue positive ways in which they can return linguistic favors to the community. Wolfram and All share several motivations outside of altruism and responsibility for co-producing linguistic work with the community under study, whose advice trends towards ultimately maximizing the receptivity of the work. For example, linguistic diversity programs are majoritively absent from primary and secondary education, but the authors note through their experiences with teachers that the most successful programs are those with curricula which make appeals to the inseparability of culture, history, and language, focusing on variation and grounding that focus in geography, cultural beliefs, and social practices. Wolfram et al. Report that in the 15 years prior to publishing their work, most such programs remained at the pilot stage. And in the 15 years since 2008, I can sadly confirm that the United States still lacks nationally recognized linguistic diversity curricula, and only a handful of independently organized initiatives exist, and they're linked here. One reason such efforts are stymied is that changing language attitudes is a generational task, which involves long-term formal and informal re-education on both a local and broad-based level. Most individuals command a linguistic style which deviates from the standard, and many individuals are aware that this deviation is typically perceived as inferiority. Persistent perceptions of inferiority often convince at-risk populations to work against formal linguistic justice initiatives. This was observable during the infamous Ebonics controversy in the overwhelming discord across the Black community, which supported different personal opinions about the reality of Ebonics, directly contradicting the professional stance on the matter. In my research with Black professionals, I found that about 30% of interviewees had a negative view of AAL, some even claiming to never produce it outside of interactions with professional interactions or with their immediate families, all while producing the variety throughout our interview. So this reveals that what we are able to measure as professionals, what can be objectively described within the bounds of our field, cannot be expected to mesh with what individuals perceive or embody with respect to language use. A number of approaches do exist, however, for deepening community participation, and the most low-stakes approach is to pay attention to current events, which I know is a bit of an ask in like the unfolding lotus of tragedy we find ourselves in. Language is continuously moving around us, and one of the best things we can do with our linguistic knowledge is to enter into as many relevant conversations as possible and remind people that languages and dialects are functionally equal, that complexity is a manufactured concept, that men actually produce higher rates of vocal fry, like whatever equity tidbits you have rolling around up there. We can consider contributing our expertise to formal education in some fashion. For instance, providing enriched encounters with the linguistic community being analyzed, as Mallinson et al. And others have done by including CDs of speech, music, interviews, and data sets along with their documentary work. Experts can also seek to engage in curricular development at primary, secondary, and higher education levels, to contribute linguistic knowledge to universally covered concepts such as biological diversity, imperial history, and the arts. Additionally, multimodal projects for the public good, like infographics, museum exhibits, and documentaries, can be co-created with members of the community to merge oral history and sociolinguistics and expand out of the grammar or the corpus. One perennial question which remains is, what do we choose to include? Certainly, deferring to the community perspective isn't a cure-all for this issue because communities are not harmonious, consensual social organisms. We should be working to both represent and respect extant hierarchies and groups providing us with our data, and this can introduce a whole host of issues for the researcher and the advocate. But what I'd like to focus on is Blommert's conceit that linguists are ideological brokers themselves, and many of whom make a bid through their work to replace a prevailing negative language ideology with an alternative view of linguistic equality. We have a highly specialized way of describing things, the languages and the people who use them, most of which is extrapolated and abstracted for academic work and does not recognize the practical, real-world sociopolitical consequences of employing the variety being described. In fact, this line between the analyst and the analyzed, one which shapes what is being observed through its observation, is a present consideration in all organized science. As Philip 2013 states, what one can analyze and how it can be analyzed depends on how research was conceptualized in the first place, what motivates decisions about what kinds of data to collect, and what motivated decisions about what data to further process. Our confidence in the influence of such social variables as user age and region of origin allows us to scaffold a classification system for language, even when we aren't sure what we're going to find. These certain influential characteristics have been defined over a century of organized language study in the West and are most often understood to be indexed to the ways in which one speaks. The study of speech has been prioritized over the last 50 years in linguistic inquiry over all other forms of communication, not only over other forms of linguistic structure. Many linguists and language-related experts from other fields, such as speech pathologists, maintain the belief that speech is the only viable and acceptable form of languaging. And this modality chauvinism is perhaps the most glaring imbalance across linguistic data sets, one with palpable consequences, not only in our theory, but in the wider world for language users. The speech-centric harms in our epistemology stem from the very history of science itself, which in its nascence carved out space for what it would produce at the expense of other extant ways of knowing, religious, individual, experiential, matrilineal, indigenous, creating what Nader calls the keystone of modernity through the creation of hegemonic categories and assessments of items, individuals, and behaviors as so-called primitive versus civilized, or simple versus complex. And this organization and standardization, the scientist, the researcher, the scholar also become power brokers in terms of the normalized relations of human systems. This matters for our consideration of the ways in which language users could and should be interviewed about their language use and the parts of their linguistic production worth analyzing when they've shared their experiences with their whole bodies in front of whatever recording equipment they've consented to. Traditional variationist approaches have created deficit models of language use. Leonard reports on the Boasian approach, which on the one hand addressed a social injustice that the wider white public believed indigenous languages to be primitive or otherwise inferior. However, the disciplinary response was to extract these languages from their original contexts and to legitimize them by remanufacturing them as empirical scientific objects. Such operations directly reject principles of reciprocity. We see this tradition of extractionism, which rejected indigenous needs, and epistemologies echoed in sociolinguistic survey methods, which were initially developed in part to address what was viewed as underperformance of Black students in urban school districts. contributing to deficit models by delimiting who was Black enough to interview about African American English and what could be counted as produced examples of racialized language from a set of previously described so-called vernacular features. Although the intentions behind early sociolinguistic work in large urban Black communities may have been altruistic, what resulted has been a decades-long campaign on the part of Black linguists and Black people to wrest possession of Black varieties back from the idealized, poor, young, urban male our literature initially awarded them to, and to defend the validity, uniqueness, but not exoticization and heterogeneity of Black language and the agency and creativity of its users. This campaign was and is necessary because Black people experience linguistic discrimination every day due to the weaponization of language across institutions, and this creates cumulative effects on personhood, agency, social mobility, and community development. All of this to say, what we call things really, really matters. And we hold all of this information alongside the documented and difficult struggle members of the communities we study have in breaching the walls of our ivory tower and contributing to this discourse through traditional means by becoming language scholars themselves. In Kubota's excellent work on epistemological racism, she illustrates the ways in which underrepresented scholars often enter the academy to center their ways of knowing, but are expected to adopt white norms in order to be so-called good scholars. This is sociolinguistic labor, which demands an individual produce language in an unnatural way to make other people comfortable. While these concerns have been primarily described in the literature from a racialized perspective, it's crucial to recognize that the field of linguistics continues to place all non-normative forms of languaging on the margins while using ableist rhetoric to uphold racism, sexism, and transmisia through compulsory able-bodiedness and heteronormativity. We find that efforts at inclusion and equity are stymied from both directions, both in terms of representing the community as they are in our genres of production, and in terms of welcoming the community into disciplines formed around studying their language in context. In this light, Rickford 99 and King 2020 suggest documenting the language of underrepresented communities as fully and accurately as possible, which becomes in itself social justice work and stands to address power imbalances inherent both in society and the academy. In their 2020 treatise on racial justice in linguistics, Charity Hudley, Mallinson, and Bucholtz enter into this conversation by considering the adequacy of linguistic science. In our response to this article, my co-author Rachel Weissler and I agreed that if our science is going to be adequate, if our commitment to understanding linguistic structure and function is to be fulfilled, we must recognize the following. Our science is inherently flawed without the consideration of other ways of knowing. The field is white and passively and actively upholds white supremacy, and differently embodied people at all levels of our field are at risk existing in the status quo. We can begin addressing these seemingly larger than life issues by expanding our analytic view and including all of the material factors at play when one is speaking, writing, or signing. Plenty of natural sciences already do this, already account for the full material properties of a system before they are able to predict its behavior. Quantum physics, astrophysics, cosmology, but also modern biology, ecology, and disciplines like public health, economics, and marketing take a universal analytic view. Taking this full accounting approach is a challenge because we, like physicists, can never actually view the system we are studying in its entirety. We are inside it. Language is too big for us to see. Read your Newton, okay? Look at how he reckons with planetary oscillation by comparing it to linguistic systems. It's a real treat. We can never set ourselves outside the system such that we can stand back and look at it, hold it still, and then describe all of its properties. That's probably why the founders of our field didn't do that. But we can do this when we interview an individual or embed ourselves in a community or query a body of text, because this provides us with a facet of language that we're able to turn around and view from all sides. Wright I argue that the goal of such work is not to elicit production for experimentation or phonetic analysis. The goal is to communicate with human beings about how they conceptualize their language use. The goal is centering them in the study of their own variation. Data can then be carefully analyzed to reveal patterns in these observations across individuals and to establish the linguistic variables, which might be doing heavy perceptual lifting in shared specific contexts like the workplace. Then focused, incremental, and direct experimentation can be produced with large representative populations in the most accessible yet controlled conditions possible on the perception of specific linguistic material, that material being these potentially heavy lifting variables which have been identified by the population. The approach is necessarily interdisciplinary, and it must be so to allow for the analysis of linguistic objects as they exist in reality, which is in the middle of things. When we ask our participants only to read a word list, nas, wat, ras, pras, lam, nan, or have folks sit with us for 90 minutes and speak with us, but our analytic goal is to merely count the number of times they said dat instead of that, we are ignoring the object placed in front of us. We describe its appearance, but not its purpose. When we don't use all the data, we rob ourselves of an opportunity to consider the fullness of the user's material experiences, which contribute to their linguistic production each day, which contribute to the evolution of language writ large. When we do not use all the data, oh, sorry, I said that. The trees are not enough. We have to look at the forest. My research into Black professionalism essentially begins with the recognition of the relationship between deficit models and institutions and the inherent reciprocity in embodied perception and production. Flores and Rosa's ratiolinguistic perspective recognizes that bodies cannot be separated from the production of language or their place in society, and that people who exist in certain types of bodies never produce language in any form that is perceived as proper or standard or respectful or complete or complex or clean or clear or civil or good enough. Such an approach directly challenges the notion that the legitimacy of marginalized populations lies in their assimilation to a white norm. So let's take a few refreshing steps back with an illustrative contextualized example of how these ideologies can become relevant. A handful of people are engaging in a conversation. Each of them exists in a different body. They all have different ages and races and come from different places. All these language users choose their utterances, perhaps producing some type of greeting. Hi, hey, what's up? And what is being weighted? The value between variables for the user, their exchange rate in the emergent context, is to an extent predetermined by the structure of the market, the now containing space where the dialectic moment of social process occurs. Imagine that this interaction is happening while you're waiting for an Uber. Now imagine it outside of a courtroom. These contexts shift the range of greetings available, but for some users, the greeting they normally reach for would fit both settings or would need to change the least to fit market expectations. In consideration of linguistic markets, we can imagine them as where commodified sociolinguistic labor is taking place. Sociolinguistic resources are material, and they have utility because they, like all material, possess specific properties, aspects that distinguish it from other material and make it appropriate to meet certain needs. Like all forms of labor, sociolinguistic labor has the power to produce more value than it contains. This outcome results in part from the development of a globalized economy that values homogeneity. Bourdieu describes the linguistic market as valuing material based on an established norm, a standard of production, which serves as an exchange rate. In Zhang's study of Beijing professionals, this exchange rate is the production of modern standard Mandarin. A user in this market then does sociolinguistic labor to tell a joke or gain professional advantage or inhabit an identity, participate in some other act of being. Depending on their embodied proximity to a standard language user, they may have to do more or less work. Their exchange rate is adjusted to satisfy their needs or meet their stated ends. This framing brings in questions of time and space. Clearly, where and when a user is shapes how language is produced, as well as of agentiveness. Like how much of like the extent variation can one user actively know or employ? In considering time, space, and variation, we might ask, why are people motivated to use one style over another? Why do we see standardized language gradually replacing all other ways of languaging across all spheres of usage over time? Well, the simplest answer for that is that all linguistic material has a social meaning, be that material a variable like the fortified D in day, which is sometimes racialized and other times regionalized. Or consider a whole variety like Yiddish, whose usage can variously indicate one's ethnicity, religion, or region of origin. Regardless, the meaning of linguistic material is often entirely separate from a produced variable structure and function. These social meanings manifest because, as Babel unequivocally states, people perceive and produce language through the lens of social categories. The usage of linguistic material carries and or activates different social meanings for individuals based on their class, age, race, sexuality, regionality, and lived experiences. It is individuals who are aware, and the individual is conditioned by their social milieu. Our social milieu is one which exhibits a standard language ideology or a bias towards an idealized spoken language, which is maintained by dominant block institutions and which is drawn primarily from the language of the upper middle class. This bias may be passive or active in individuals, but it creates a scenario where all the social meanings available to a user in a given context have been pre-valued by an overlaying perceptive structure, which judges the proximity of produced linguistic material to an abstracted standard variety, one used primarily by the middle-aged, the able-bodied, the cishet, the moneyed, the white, the Christian, and the male across the global north. As Cree scholar Sean Wilson observes, relationships do not merely shape reality, they are reality, and knowledge even of ourselves, emerges through and is dependent on all of our relationships, including with ideas. Our social milieu asks very little of some users in terms of their linguistic production because what is already natural or comfortable for them is what is expected in most linguistic markets, what has become so-called appropriate across domains of usage. Once this social milieu was well established, which was concurrent with the development of Webster's first edition, and what ties back into our earlier conversation about the adequacy of our science, the linguistic researcher as ideological broker and welcoming members of the community in which linguistic data is extracted from into the discipline which studies their lifeways and context, is that once Black people in the United States were afforded access to written word by law, any idea generated must be presented back to society in such a way that it leans towards the preferences of those in social control. Knowledge is power, and the bodies populating our institutions do not want to lose an iota of it. It is here, though, in this historically informed, embodiment conditioned yet agentive dialectic moment of social process, that the individual choices which actuate change occur. And considering the individual facet of universal human languaging that is Black American language use, we're able to encounter a wedge shoved in the binary choice between cultural and social stability, what I have come to call a third wave variety in the Black accented standard. This view is made possible by the socio-historical conditions placed on African-American language users and the direct indexation of the majority of their daily linguistic choices to potent and omnipresent standard language ideologies. What is important to recognize from this statement is that the phenomena we are discussing extend to all of us, that no one group is specifically at fault for what I'm describing, that this facet is a place we can clearly see these forces at work because in other centralized and less marginalized communities, these effects are more insidious, private, and often subconscious. Across time and across communities, the ways in which most people have had open to them to use language in the world has not been entirely free. The Black accented standard, as first described by Orlando Taylor, who was one of the people to coin the term ebonics, for the record, exists because of the push-pull, again, movement backwards and forwards between these varieties. Taylor describes this Black accented standard as a variety which consists of adopted grammatical features from standard English combined with the distinct phonology of Black English. So if you're wondering what that sounds like, it's the Allstate guy. You're in good hands. Or War. It's like there's always one Trekkie. The variety spans the middle distance between so-called slang and standard and is the subject of Weldon's phenomenal 2021 work, which captures the very real linguistic challenges faced by upwardly mobile Black individuals. Through our socialization, some language users are marked as less than, and passive acquisition of extant language ideologies facilitates the everyday maintenance of individuals and institutions who treat non-standard language users this way. Sounding Black in adulthood, allowing the obviousness of the body you live in to be present in the way you use language, becomes a marker of all these negative connotations like low intelligence and laziness, because the education system should have fixed you, should have given you tools for, removing signs of non-standardness, and in this case, signs of your race from your language use. Weldon reports middle-class educated Black adults are struggling under the demands of many markets. Despite engaging wholeheartedly in talking proper, their labor is amplified compared to those around them. What's important to recognize from this incredibly brief discussion of institutionalized linguistic oppression, which please see these resources if you're interested in more, is that Black language users find no quarter in our built environment, no matter what variety of language they are producing. It is their Blackness which conditions how they are perceived. Weldon's work also demonstrates that Black people are not merely signaling their race when using language, but that there exists this full spectrum of racialized varieties the African American community orients to, and not only on the informal or vernacular end of the spectrum. This widened spectrum of variation is one aspect of usage I wish to capture from Black professionals to develop a broad sense of the ways in which individuals who carry considerations of sociolinguistic labor actively, consciously, in their daily practice, conceive of the fullness of their linguistic repertoires and how they might describe their style shifting practices as a group. In general, I'm interested in theorizing around the differences between the audiences users imagine and the audiences that exist. To better understand ideology's role in our real-time linguistic choices. I also want to take a moment to include that I was motivated to engage in this work through my own experience conducting Match Guides research in the housing market on the phone. Also by testimonials of students in language and discrimination sections and classes about taboo culture and foreign language teaching assistants and workshops, that discrimination is something we feel. I've been attempting to account for this aspect of perception, what we feel, in my linguistic work since the beginning. But it was only in the last 6 months that I encountered Millian's felt theory, which attempts to capture and validate knowledge emerging from experiences that are felt, both physically and emotionally, or better yet, conceptually. So if you're waiting for like a big reveal 30 minutes in, guess what? Today, we're talking about sharing feelings. Now, metalinguistic awareness has been considered in the Western canon since Aristotle, but the definition I offer for it is the aspect of acquired or learned linguistic knowledge, which can encompass factors related to language use, knowledge, distribution, meaning, or occurrence variance. What do we know when we know a language? Well, we know how we use it. We know how we use it. We know how we use it. We possess knowledge of a vast set of rules for how language does exist in the world. So why do we study it? As if you weren't thoroughly motivated. Well, these types of linguistic data have been valued in studies with communities like Black professionals and across sociolinguistic and descriptive methodologies. In Nyland's study of Black speech in DC neighborhoods, she argues that metalinguistic commentary cannot be overlooked because it reveals mechanisms for individual and community level identity construction and negotiation and interaction. Babel advocates for the study of metalinguistic commentary in its own right by stating that it is imperative we develop models of social interaction that are as detailed and subtle as is our understanding of linguistic structure. More than this, King, in her 2020 review outlining a new approach to the study of race and language, called for a deeper understanding of how speakers' linguistic behaviors articulate beliefs about their own social positions on an individual level, and advocates for the inclusion of Black people in the study of their language use because of their absence in previous study of their varieties. And so in consideration of these works and other recent findings linked here, I began developing a method which would elevate metalinguistic knowledge to the level of speech feature, in that it is afforded the same value in our inquiry as a user's speech reproduction. The metalinguistic method of sociolinguistic interview, or MMSI, contains 7 sections, and not unlike a Lebavian interview, progresses the interviewee through stages and tasks which are geared towards eliciting different and increasingly richer types of metacommentary. For this first application, I designed a protocol to elicit commentary on 5 key social factors, as well as other aspects of variance individuals could be expected to comment on. Wright 2022, linked here, is a report on the first iteration of this method and contains analysis and discussion of the targeted terms section, 3 thematic reports across sections and interviewees, 3 case studies, and a perceptual experiment. Aspects of the design of the metalinguistic method of sociolinguistic interview are a critique on my part. I was driven by Henner and Robinson's observations of the phonocentrism in the field to ask what ways had it affected me as an able-bodied researcher. For reasons articulated in this critique, I feel comfortable taking the position that centralizing speech in the scientific study of language is not necessary to produce robust, well-informed, replicable, and effective scholarship. The most important goal of the interviews I'm about to describe to you was providing an immediate means of centering the Black community in the study of their own variation, and it has done that. Essentially, it is my hope that this method will be applied and refined by any researcher seeking to turn the concept of appropriateness on its head. I interviewed 17 self-identified Black professionals from Detroit, 7 men and 10 women. 5 interviewees worked in the education sector, 3 in the nonprofit sector, and the other 9 came from different professions. I truly wish that I had time to tell you about all of them because they are each incredible humans. But instead, I'll just present some excerpts from 2 interviewees' reflections, which illustrate the emergence of concepts like sociolinguistic labor and authenticity better than my summary ever could. So we'll first hear, the first reflection comes from Aries, a 30-year-old male who at the end of his interview asked if he could tell one last story. He recounts here a moment at a conference he termed a changing experience for him that made him recognize his Blackness in a different way. This interview was conducted outside during the pandemic, so you're going to hear birds. Can I do it? Okay. Wait,
Might be able to do it there.
it's because it's you, right?
Yeah.
I'll try and share it quick. I want you to hear them. They're the best part. Where are we going to lunch, you guys? Where are we going to lunch? Let's figure it out in 2 minutes. 2 minutes to have this discussion.
Oh, boy.
Anybody else?
Okay. So we gotta do that. I was thinking like a cola, but it's all the way.
Well, we
through.
could do it,
Oh,
right?
stop being.
Is it like an outdoor?
I mean, that's part of it.
Oh.
There's like indoor seating, but also like some of the indoor seating is kind of outdoor.
Gotcha.
Well,
What if I just play it from here?
So what's the choice, which is?
I shall, yes, I guess I shall determine my, my sentence.
It's 53 degrees right now. It will be higher by the time.
Depends on how long it takes you to find the message.
Okay.
Today, close to 62.
Yeah. That's pretty,
Still not long.
that's comfortable for anybody.
So we'll go with witches.
Okay.
I think there's.
Yeah, it will be 62 until.
All right, I'm gonna try and play from my laptop.
All right.
Just, use your ears, good listeners, good trained listeners.
I went to it and I'll never forget this lady. Don't remember her name though, but she was an author. She wrote a book, and it gave me a different perspective of where, like, how I actually view myself now. She asked this white lady, like, what do you see when you wake up? Like, how do you live your life now? She's like, oh, well, I'm a mother, I'm this and that. I work for a living, and I'm an educated woman. I'm striving to be best in my department. I think that people see me because I'm a woman, that I think I'm weak, but I'm very strong woman, stuff like that. That's what she told me. The white man told her. So she's like, ask me the same. So ask her the same. She's like, you know what I see when I wake up every day? Not black. And she's like, that's something I have to wake up with every single day, because even if I don't, I'm reminded that I'm black by my counterpart. I'm reminded that I'm black through daily media, through the news, through every different thing. So I can't have a bad day because I'm black. I can't come to work with emotions in my shoulders because I'm black. I can lose this. And that was the first time I realized, like, I really do think that. I wake up every day and say, like, I'm black. I have black moments every single day, and it's a fact. Like, I don't think I've ever had a day where I can just go through life and not think about my color.
It's okay, no, to hear, okay. Aries is reflecting on the daily labor involved in living in a Black body, of never being able to forget the history that made our bodies different, of always being on guard. This is reflected in the concept of sociolinguistic labor, which, attempting to account for the weight of such daily awareness, begins to provide us with an understanding of the psychosocial consequences of omnipresent style shifting work. There are people who can just go through life, but Aries isn't one of them. Can I get the transcript back up?
I think if you switch it to the,
I think it's on the Google Drive if you switch tabs to like all. Sorry, I'm trying to see how to do it on here. There we go.
There we go. Great. Okay, perfect.
Like, plug into the audio of her computer.
Is this mic on? I can just hold it up. I'm sorry, what?
You can have more than one account, like the Google account on that computer.
Yeah.
If you log in as yourself.
Should we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one more clip.
No, I didn't know. I just didn't know, like.
Yes.
I'd like to support your commitment to anti-ableism and say that personally, I was unable to hear a single word of what you just played because I am not an able hearing person.
Okay,
So I would
we'll take the
support-
time.
Yeah,
No
we can do
problem.
that.
If you
Just,
don't mind, thank you.
I don't. Show me what to do and I'll get ready to two-factor.
Trying to think what the best way to do this. I think the best way might be to do it through sharing.
Well, I
if you can.
tried.
Okay.
Could you request the access and then you?
That is what I'm saying. I
Oh,
could not do that. It wouldn't load. I can't figure out why.
Oh, I
It's,
see.
see, it's just,
Here, I can do it. I can do it.
Like because the sound thing comes from.
It's very complicated to do the sound,
Okay.
to be honest. So
see,
here's
I'm
what I
just
will,
waiting for it to load. So it's better, I guess.
what I can do is maybe try requesting it from this link.
Sure.
Let's try that. So I will request it from,
There's two more.
yeah, I can do it for both of them.
All right.
So I'm sending one request
I'll just keep refreshing.
and then
You,
is it
yeah.
just this one, authenticity? And then,
no,
oh, got
we
it.
did authenticity, or we did
This
that
one.
already. But there's two more in the experiment slides.
Okay, got it. I will request all of
Actually,
them.
three.
No,
I can just say the stimuli. I don't have to play it.
for later on.
One more. Two. Yeah,
Both of
these
these?
two, and then there's one more.
Okay.
I'll share them with you now.
It'll only take a second. Sorry, I should have checked the audio beforehand. So this one seems to be available.
And it's, it's private because I can't distribute this audio. Yeah.
Might ask about.
Yeah, so those ones are working new.
Oh, they're all working. Oh,
It looks like. Yeah, the stimulus ones are working.
fantastic.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
think I will check this last one, but I
Did
think
I
we're
play
good.
Aries again?
Yeah.
All
Okay,
right, let me put
I
that
shall.
to the front. I've got them in order up here, so you can just switch between the PowerPoint and then the Google. If you hit Alt tab,
Okay,
it'll pull
Got
up everything.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. That's me. All right, so Aries, 30-year-old male at the end of his interview asked if he could tell one last story that made him recognize his Blackness in a different way.
I went to it and I'll never forget this lady. I don't remember her name though, but she was an author. She wrote a book, and it gave me a different perspective of where, like, how I actually view myself now. He asked this white lady, like, what do you see when you wake up? Like, how do you live your life now? He's like, oh, well, you know, my mother, I'm this and that. I work for a living, and you know, I'm an educated woman. I'm striving to be best in my department. You know, like, I think that people see me, you know, because I'm a woman, and I think I'm weak, but I'm very strong woman, stuff like that. That's what she told me. Like, the white woman told her. He was like, ask me the same. So they asked the same. But you know what I see when I wake up every day? You know, I'm Black. And she's like, that's something I have to wake up with every single day, because, you know, I'm reminded that I'm Black by my counterparts. I'm reminded that I'm Black through daily media, through the news, through, you know, every different thing. So I can't have a bad day because I'm Black. I can't come to work with a emotion on my shoulders because I'm Black. I can lose this. And that was the first time I realized, like, I really do think that I wake up every day and say, like, I'm Black. I have Black moments every single day, and it's a fact. Like, I don't think I've ever had a day where I can just go through life and not think about my color. You know?
Right.
Oh my goodness. Aries is reflecting here on, I don't know how to get the transcript back.
I think that's because of the audio slider. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, I'm sorry, everybody.
Okay. It should be working.
Yeah.
Oh, it is now.
There we go.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. All right, Aries is reflecting here on the daily labor involved in living in a Black body, of never being able to forget the history that made our bodies different. This is reflected in sociolinguistic labor, which, in attempting to count for the weight of such daily awareness, begins to provide us with an understanding of the psychosocial consequences of omnipresent style shifting work. There are people who can just go through life, but Aries isn't one of them. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to let London, a 32-year-old female radio producer, share her thoughts on the concept of authentic usage of Black language. Oh my goodness. I've never done that. I don't know what I'm doing.
I don't know. I asked that question a lot. I'm like, what does that even mean? Authentically Black voice. Because what is the Black voice? Language overall, and who's to say proper way to speak? I mean, there was another person made of flesh and bone who created this concept of language and how, you know, what's proper and what's not, and that's what we've been taught, so that's what we go by. I think with Black folks, I think a lot of us was rooted in finding and feeling the energy and the soul and the spirit of our lineage and our ancestors. And the literature, you know, that we read too, and how, because even with Gil Scott Heron, I'm thinking about a piece where he was saying, you know, talking like the people. So if your ear is like to the street, you know, then what are you hearing? And so if you have a message, okay, let's utilize, you know, what you're hearing in the everyday world and put it to your message. Now you're reaching people at their different levels. People look at, slang or ebonics, as uneducated talk, uneducated speech because the roots of it, I don't know, I mean, I think, whatever feels good to you and whatever, like, my concern is, are you able to get your thoughts out? Can you form, a cohesive statement, ask the question, authentically, like, I mean, I guess you can feel when someone is trying to project being a certain way, that is inauthentic to, again, their environment, what they grew up with. Now I'm thinking about Strictly Business. I don't know if you saw that movie, but when the Black dude, straight collar, and you gotta think that Angela, who runs and, is in the club, and homeboy that works in the mailbox room, they link up. And so Wayman is like now trying to get with the, he's never been to Harlem, so now he's trying to catch the Harlem vibe, and yo, my man, my brother. So it's like, dude, that's not authentic to who you are. You know what I mean? So you can feel when it's being perpetrated, or, the stereotype of it.
This meta commentary from London was very inspiring to me. There's such nuance here. Nuance that took my predominantly white space overeducated ass like a decade to develop. She's talking about the colonial origins of Black varieties, about gathering language directly from the community to maximize receptivity of a message, about authenticity being determined more by how one feels and where one is than the composition of one's body or what they're producing. The fine line between accommodation and appropriation. Why would we ever need to look farther than the community to describe linguistic behavior? If authentically Black voices are those which are the most honestly uplifting the experiences of Black people, if they are those which make Black folks the most comfortable in whatever settings they find themselves in, then indeed it's not something that can be appropriated away from the culture. That makes authenticity a moving target, something felt, and something that is continually redefined as the experiences of Black people continue to evolve. My research questions for the first application of the MMSI involved determining what motivates Black people to style shift. Given Lippy Green's definition of the standard language ideology, the ideology itself may introduce a bias into the system for standard language use that could motivate Black people, and indeed all language users, to move toward the standard. Across the 40 hours of data I collected, I cannot claim that a general bias for the preferred variety of the powerful can account for the daily actions of self-censorship that these interviewees reported. Holiday and Squire share reports from their interviewees stating they find racialized varieties to be inappropriate for professional settings. And similarly, Nile in 2015 contended that shifting towards standard varieties in DC neighborhoods was due to an awareness of stigmatization. While only 2 of my interviewees used the exact words inappropriateness or stigma, other interviewees provide meta commentary which suggested these sentiments may be motivators for them as well. However, motivations of many are murkier in this regard because a third of interviewees described making efforts to incorporate their racialized varieties into their workplaces. There is also a potential that Black people style shift to stay safe, which Weldon's work on the Black middle class language reports, but Baker Bell tells us is fallacious because Black people are never safe. Fallacious or not, 7 of my interviewees reported safeness as a motivator, at times referring to physical safety, maintaining their autonomy, mitigating risk in the workplace or other social spaces, or protecting one's energies by not opening up the opportunity to be misunderstood. Eliciting and analyzing linguistic production as done in a traditional sociolinguistic interview would not have addressed these several competing narratives in the literature, and I'm grateful to be able to deepen our understanding of Black motivations for style shifting by presenting how these professionals orient to their own experiences. Such differences in orientation reflect the intersection of individually held linguistic ideologies with collectively held identity-based social stereotypes. What remains for us to discuss is, are they successful? When Black professionals choose to style shift for whatever reason in the workplace, are they successful in making that movement towards more standardized varieties? Do they appear more professional? I designed a speech perception experiment to engage with such shifting practices directly. In each experimental trial, listeners hear a pair of sentences only presented orally and choose which sentence sounds more professional, sentence A or sentence B. In each sentence pair, listeners hear identically worded sentences that differ in the number of non-standard variables. 3 variables were chosen because interviewees cited them as aspects of their racialized styles they shift away from in the practice of their professions. And in the case of Day, 90% of interviewees also cited this feature as sounding very city. There were 3 between subjects conditions tested in a fully randomized design, followed by a diagnostic pair, which was presented last to all of 300 listeners. In the interest of time, I'm going to present results which best demonstrate the ways in which these variables relate to each other. Here, the diagnostic case is testing an all standard sentence against a sentence with 1 non-standard feature present, acts. Let's hear their sentences. Here's the all standard. I'm never going to do it right.
You want to try removing it?
We knew they might ask about a new trend in stock options.
And here's your metathesis.
Can you please turn it off?
How? Sorry, that was at this, not you.
We knew they might ask about a new trend in stock options. We knew they might ask about a new trend in stock options.
Here, okay, the outcomes for this condition establish that the overwhelming majority of listeners across demographic categories reliably choose the all standard sentence as more professional sounding. That blue bar, demonstrably larger than the red bar. Sets 1 and 2 exist, they're in the bonus features. Set 3 is designed to more closely assess the relative professionalism of the 3 variables under study. So we have a sentence with 1 variable being compared to a double variable sentence. So I'm going to play that double variable sentence featuring TH stopping and consonant cluster reduction. Fingers crossed, everybody. I didn't see a single finger cross. What is the deal?
We knew they might ask about a new trend in stock options.
And the outcome of this condition finds that while the general trend is still present, all of those blue bars remain larger. Not all of these variables are behaving the same. In fact, the salience of acts is so strong that it begins to produce a blocking effect in that listeners are as likely to choose the 2 variable sentence as professional sounding as they are to choose this 1 variable sentence. A true blocking effect would make that red bar larger, but this toss-up outcome suggests that listener stereotypes about acts were activated. Listeners are weighting a single act against the other 2 variables in terms of professionalism, and results indicate that the 100 participants who received this sentence pair were split in their judgments. When viewed in relation to the diagnostic case, where all 300 participants made a decision between ask and acts in terms of professionalism, their choice was strikingly not in favor of the highly salient, Black indexed, non-standard, and deeply stereotyped speech feature. Comparing the outcomes of these 2 conditions indicates that stereotype activation may indeed hinder certain types of processing, a possibility those cited here have also raised, although direct experimentation will be needed to confirm that. What I can confidently report is that all 3 variables from the speaker are dispreferred in this context, some more than others, which adds some color to the foundational claims of radiolinguistic inquiry that people in certain bodies are never perceived as good enough. That may be so, but it does seem that clearly defined strategies exist for sounding better, strategies that move language towards more standardized varieties, strategies which appear not only to be perceivable, but preferred by the general listening public, strategies that beg for further investigation. In light of all I've shared with you today, we must consider if non-market exchanges of linguistic material even exist, and if not, we must then consider the ways in which an absence of reciprocal relationships shapes the ethical responsibilities of the expert linguist. We are called to address the ways in which language use often becomes a public proxy for private hatreds and stereotypes, indexing the usage of certain varieties to low intelligence, laziness, or lawlessness, because we are the only experts who can. We are called to reimagine our discipline as one which serves society rather than extracts from it. Our role as responsible social scientists, in fact, requires us to move our linguistic inquiry into veins which are not commensurate with value in the academic meritocracy. Using my own experience as a candid example, I've been producing work that serves people and not the academy for over a decade. I am often thanked for it and invited to present on it, but I have yet to retain stable employment or financial support from the professional organizations needed to further my policy-driven research or meet my basic needs. In this light, it becomes rather difficult for me to stand in a room of budding linguists and encourage them to commit to linguistic justice. But as Wolfram reminds us, engagement is not centered around a final product. It is a state of being that we can use to infuse our processes, can allow the ways we already do things to reflect our personal and radical recognition of mutual equity between linguistic forms and their users. As we enter each stage of research, it can be designed, analyzed, presented, replicated through equitable and representative means which necessarily evolve over time as the needs of the communities we study grow and change. The easiest communities to serve are the ones you are already embedded in. This university community, the Research Triangle, North Carolina, male-bodied people, teachers, martial artists, anarchists, you get the idea. Okay. In fact, a community-driven idea generation approach is so evident that even after all we've discussed today, I still remain surprised that such an approach isn't the norm, or rather has only been the norm where field workers engage with Indigenous communities. But we should be taking such efforts with all communities, and in my opinion, work on linguistic variation or change that's not meaningfully engaging with or reporting the perspectives of the communities it's researching should never be accepted for publication moving forward. So I encourage you to activate the spirit of mutual exchange as you invite people to share their language experiences with you and allow them to shape the application of your linguistic expertise. It really is just about prioritizing language users over their language use. Thank you. For questions.
I just want to mention that the people on Zoom get the message, you are being recorded, but people in the room didn't get that message, so we are being.